All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is Jason Manners from Voice of Freedom. Today I have Gordon G. Chang with me. He's a columnist for the Daily Beast. He's been up on a lot of news channels like CNN, Fox News, and lot more. And today I want to ask him some questions, and we're going to have a conversation about certain things. Gordon, you still there?
I'm still here.
Okay. So before I ask you actually other questions about Korea, China, and stuff like that, could you go ahead and introduce and tell more about yourself?
I'm Gordon Chang. I'm the author of Coming Collapse of China and Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World. I'm a Daily Beast columnist, and I'm so glad to be on your podcast.
All right, thank you. So I recently saw your interview on CNN, or I don't know really if it's an interview or if they were just asking you a few questions, but they asked you about President Trump when he said that he fell in love with Kim Jong Un after he read a letter. How's your take on that?
Well, I don't think it was appropriate for President Trump to say that he fell in love with the dictator of the world's most horrific regime. I mean, this
Hmm.
legitimizes Kim. It
Hmm.
also undercuts our human rights diplomacy. It gives Kim an opportunity to stall the denuclearization process. And it
Hmm.
also helps create an environment where Moon Jae-in, the South Korean president,
Hmm.
is able to accomplish certain things which I think are undercut the peace and order in the world. So, for instance, Moon Jae-in has been undermining democracy in democratic institutions in South Korea.
Hmm.
He's been allowing the pro-North Korean thugs the free reign of South Korean soil,
Hmm.
and both by agreement and unilaterally, he has been taking down South Korea's defenses against a North Korean invasion.
Hmm.
This is not a good thing.
Yeah, it's actually not. I actually took a look at all that, and what I found about this may surprise you, may not. I don't know if why no one has ever reported the idea of this, but do you remember the ferry boat that sunk in South Korea?
Yes, in 2010, I believe.
2010.
Oh no, the one in South Korea.
Mm-hmm.
The South. Oh yes,
Yeah, 2014.
okay.
Okay, so what that ferry boat, according to the investigation from that that time, the former president there, Park Geun-hye, the investigation showed that the boat actually wouldn't have sunk based off what other investigations showed. It was more like um, someone knocked the ship over, and according according to my investigations I made with people who work for Moon Jae-in, the current president, and who still work for him, work more on his North Korea diplomatic issues. Those people, before this ferry boat sinking, they actually told the world the day before that a ferry boat sunk. And then, on after the ferry boat sunk, the Blue House, which that time it was President Park Geun-hye of South Korea, they gave a report that it was more than likely some kind of attack from a um, North Korean spy ship that was lurking around in that area, and for some reason it was never ever reported on the news ever.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that, but of course the North Koreans sunk the Chonan, the South Korean frigate,
Mhm.
in 2010.
Mhm.
It's clear that the North Koreans are doing all they possibly can to subvert South Korean democracy and institutions, and they want to take over South Korea. This has
Mhm.
been in the Kim family playbook since the very beginning. So we're talking since 1948. And we've got to remember that South Korea survives because you've got the U.S. military there and because you have those democratic institutions. And Moon Jae-in is doing his best to undermine this whole notion of freedom and democracy. So it's important for us to make sure that Koreans fight for and keep their society, which is free and democratic.
So the next question is, there was according to an independent media group in South Korea called Newstown, they said that Moon Jae-in's mother and father may have been North Korean spies because they left North Korea in 1950, I believe 1950. Remember when the Christmas miracle happened that time when the U.S. Army took North Koreans down to Busan? That that
Yep.
that time, Moon Jae-in's mother and father rowed the boat, and they got down to South Korea. So the report is from the independent news media that Moon Jae-in was probably taught to be nice to North Korea if he became a politician, and that his mother and father may have been spies. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I don't know if they were, but the point is, let's look at what Moon is in fact trying to do. We know that he's trying to take the notion of liberal out of liberal democracy. His party tried to amend the Constitution. That didn't work, but they did change the textbooks in this regard. They also deleted from the textbooks the phrase that South Korea is the only legitimate government on the Korean Peninsula. They have been working very hard to try to make South Korea more compatible with North Korea. So when we look at this, what Moon has been doing, we don't have to think about what his intentions are. I don't know. I'm not inside his mind. But we just look at what he's been doing to subvert South Korean society, and that we should be concerned about. So you put all this together, we have to, work to make sure that South Koreans are able to maintain their free institutions.
All right. Do you think President Trump is looking at this and is taking this into some serious concern about what Moon Jae-in's doing in South Korea?
Well, so far President Trump has created this environment for Moon to do these things, and therefore, you don't see U.S. forces Korea criticizing the 17-page military agreement that Moon and Kim Jong-un signed when Moon was in Pyongyang last month. And also, we haven't raised a concern about some of the unilateral actions that Moon has taken to reduce the effectiveness and the readiness of the South Korean military. So we need to do much more in this regard. So far we have seen and treated Moon as a partner, but I don't think we should do that. We should view him as working with Kim Jong-un, because we know that Kim and Moon have similar goals. They both want unification of the two Koreas. They want the South to invest in the North. These are things which I think undermine sanctions, and so therefore they undermine the ability of the international community to disarm North Korea.
All right. So you remember the former president in South Korea, the lady president, the first lady president, the Park Geun-hye?
Yes, of course.
So Moon Jae-in actually was a strong leader to try to push her and kick her out of the presidency, and she was actually one of the strongest presidents against North Korea in a long time since her father was president. But then she's impeached now and she's inside prison. Do you think Moon wanted her out because she was too strong on North Korea, or is there any other ideas?
Well, I don't know what Moon's intentions are, but clearly Moon took advantage of the impeachment and conviction of Park Geun-hye, and so therefore, we can look at it from that perspective. Moon has a very different view than Park did of, for instance, North Korea, and also Moon has views about the way South Korean society should be organized, which are very different from those of the conservative forces that support
All right. Yeah. So there is actually right now quite a bit of South Koreans. According to Fox News, they said it was a small amount of supporters, but I wish Fox News actually went there in March and saw how many people there were. There was the whole Seoul was actually filled with these people who marched and protest against Moon Jae-in. But according to the mainstream media in South Korea, they said they were pretty violent, but there was actually no violence made in those protests. Do you think it's a good idea for these people to protest against Moon Jae-in?
People should protest. They should be concerned about their freedoms. They should
Mhm.
be concerned about his economic policies, which have
Mhm.
caused the stagnation of the economy. And of
Mhm.
course, they should be concerned about his unification policies. All of this put together
Mhm.
indicates to me that people should be protesting what Moon is doing.
All right. So there was a police report years ago about Moon Jae-in about his involvement with North Korea years ago when Bak Geun-hye's father Park Jung-hee was president. He was part of the college students that went against Park Jung-hee that time, and he was arrested for working with North Korean spies that time, and it's in a police report. Do you think that someone who used to work with North Korean spies held a lot of the same ideas as a politician that he should have been elected as president?
Well, Moon as president has surrounded himself with a number of advisors who, in their youth, were members of these Juche groups.
Mhm.
And they advocated essentially the overthrow of the South Korean government by the North. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, those advisors have not disavowed their views in many cases.
Mhm.
So, again, this is a question like I don't know what Moon intends. I don't know what's inside his mind, but
Mhm.
we can see what Moon is doing and who he surrounded himself with. And that, of course, is very dangerous. So, um, this is sort of objective about
Mhm.
Moon's advisors.
Mhm.
It's not so much a question of what Moon thinks because at the end of the day, none of us are inside Moon's head except for Moon.
Yep. Okay, so now we'll move on to China a little bit. So there's a lot of people's been saying if North Korea ever got a regime change or China should do the regime change, that China should put someone in North Korea. Do you think that's a good idea that China will put someone in as a North Korean leader?
I think that if China were to get involved in North Korean politics in a more direct fashion,
Mhm.
it wouldn't be good because
Mhm.
China has had territorial designs on the Korean Peninsula for centuries.
Mhm.
And if Korea is going to maintain its territorial integrity, the last thing it needs is Chinese involvement in the politics of either Korea.
Okay. So recently there was U.S. Battleships around the Chinese islands, Chinese man-made islands, and sparked some controversy on the Chinese side. How do you do you see that China? Do you see China as a huge threat to the United States?
Well, China is the threat to the United States.
Mhm.
You're talking about China trying to close off the global commons in the South China Sea.
Mhm.
If the United States has had any consistent foreign policy over the course of its existence, it has been the defense of freedom of navigation, and the Chinese are threatening
Mhm.
that freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, in the East China Sea. So it's important for us to maintain these and conduct these freedom of navigation operations and to make sure that the global commons stays open. But China, of course, threatens in other ways. It's trying to grab
Mhm.
territory from its neighbors. It's proliferating technology and equipment to North Korea for use in
Mhm.
its ballistic missile program and
Mhm.
its nuclear weapons program. There's almost no end to Chinese mischief making in the region and elsewhere. So it's important for us to make sure that China acts in a responsible manner, and that means, in many cases, actually in most cases, opposing Beijing's initiatives.
All right. So according to a lot of politicians right now in Senate and Congress, they've been talking about Russia as being the most most
The
urgent,
biggest threat.
yeah, the most urgent case of meddling our elections, and they don't look at China a lot. And like you said, biggest threat. Do you see China as a larger threat than Russia?
Well, China and Russia are working together, so in one sense,
Mhm.
it's a single threat. But
Mhm.
China is a much more powerful country than Russia, and
Mhm.
so therefore it has the potential for doing much more harm. On any one given day, sometimes the Russians are more dangerous than the Chinese, but overall, it is China that opposes the United States and the international community in a much more effective way. So I believe China is the bigger threat. But we got to remember that both Moscow and Beijing work together because
Mhm.
Xi Jinping of China and Vladimir Putin of Russia see the world in common terms and working in ways to make the world worse.
Okay. So, do you think President Trump's stance against China is a good thing than what was viewed in Obama's time, or is it kind of even out?
President Trump's China policies are so much better than his predecessors. And it's not just President
Mhm.
Obama, but also Bush and Clinton and others. And so,
Mhm.
we just need to have a more resolute policy
Mhm.
with regard to trade, with regard to South China Sea, with
Mhm.
regard to intellectual property, you name it. And,
Mhm.
and so it's important for the United States to abandon the notion that we should integrate China into the international system.
Mhm.
This is a policy over 4 decades that has failed,
Mhm.
and clearly we need to do something new. People can argue about President Trump's tactics, but nonetheless, he has a better strategic vision of China than his predecessors.
All right. There's been concerns with Koreans that I talked about in South Korea. I talked with in South Korea, and they said they that if Moon Jae-in sells, basically unifies North and South Korea together under a North Korean type of government, that they wish the United States to take over North Korea. I mean, take over both North and South, take over the peninsula, and make it back to a republic. So if Moon Jae-in does do that, sells Korea fully, if that even ever happens, do you think it's right for the United States to go in to South Korea and try calm down the situation, or try to take it back to the Republic of Korea?
Well, the United States doesn't have a political role in Korea. Our
Mhm.
role there is to defend South Korea from North
Mhm.
Korean invasion. And so, it's important for us to realize that Korean political questions are for the Koreans themselves.
Mhm.
But what the United States can do is to make sure that South Korea is able to exist without intimidation by
Mhm.
the North. So it's important for us to recognize our limited role. Jason, I've got to go.
Oh, all right. All right.
But
I see the time here.
so thanks very much.
All right. Thank you, Gordon.
Yeah,
Thank you for being on here. Hope you have a nice day.
you too. Thank you,
Okay.
Jason.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was Gordon Chang. It was nice to having him on here. He was actually running late with a lot of things. Um, and now he's possibly on Fox News right now. And I am so sorry. But ladies and gentlemen, that was his interview with me, and hope you guys liked it. I'll go ahead and see maybe when I can do it again with him, and I hope I can be very good friends with him. Thank you all for tuning in to Truth Lighter's Voice of Freedom. This was Jason Manners, or Truth Lighter, and with Gordon Chong. Thank you.